Hello, so today we are building off of a technique that we started on in our last video. So last time we got our list of sites and subsites, so this one here from the SharePoint OData feed, and that is what we're using to iterate over to get all of our list and library information. So right now I have a list of all of the lists and libraries in my tenant, how many items they have, when they were last modified, which type of list they are, and what their version limit is. And I can use this to say, keep an eye on things that are approaching the 5,000 item list view threshold to go in and proactively create filtered views. I can sort on last modified date to see which things I could potentially delete or clean up, or even identify things that were never used when they were created, which does happen in SharePoint. It's just generally a useful tool to have an idea of what's going on. And again, just to credit Jordan Murphy, he's the one who sent me this information about how to do this and the idea. So thank you, Jordan, for that. And I'm going to put his contact info in the video description, but let's jump into the query editor so I can show you how to make this. Here's the table we set up last time. So again, this is connecting to the OData feed, getting the sites and subsites, and then pivoting that to get records for the sites in our environment. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to duplicate this query. So I'm going to right click on it and duplicate it because we don't need all of this information. We only need the path and maybe the site template if we want to filter on that. And so what I'm going to do is just step back through the actions that we did last time. I'm going to delete some of these that we don't need. And you could reference this query instead of duplicating it, but I've found that when you invoke a function on it, it'll give you an error about you can't directly reference the data source, something like that. So duplicating it seems to work out better. It uses the same amount of resources either way when you duplicate it versus reference it. So that's not really a consideration. So I'm going to leave this line in. This is where we've filtered on the site type to remove the OneDrive sites and the backend SharePoint sites. I'm going to take this change type step out because we won't need that. I'm going to keep the pivot in, and then I'm going to go back to this filter step, and I'm going to change what we're keeping here, and we're only going to keep I don't want to go through and click remove on all of those, so I'm just actually going to edit up here in the select rows. So I'm going to take out the author. So if you can see where I'm selecting, I'm starting from the each here and taking off a bunch of this. So I just want the path. So I'm just going to leave path. And I want the web template too here. Okay, so that should work. I'm going to click the little checkbox in our filter. So now we just have the path and the web template. We pivoted on that, and we filtered out the OneDrive and the backend sites. So now we have a list of sites to run this on. I'm going to rename this SP all lists, maybe. We're going to get all lists and libraries. Libraries are a type of list. So I'm going to actually set the data type on these to text like that. And now we're going to add another query. So I'm going to go to the new source up here, and I'm going to choose blank query because we're going to create a function. And I'm going to go to the advanced editor so we get some more space to work with. And what we're going to do, I'm going to erase these, and I'm going to say in parentheses input URL, and then equal sign, and I'm going to do the what do you call this? The greater than symbol, and it's kind of like makes an arrow shape, I guess. And then we're going to do let, and I'm going to hit escape to close this, and then I'm going to hit enter to go down a line, and we're going to do source again. So we're going to do a second source. You could indent this, I guess, to be the source equals odata.feed. So that pops up. I'm going to hit tab to select it. And then parentheses, and we're going to put in our parameter that we created above. So input URL. And this is going to be where the function goes and gets the path from our table. And then we're going to do space and an and symbol. And then we're going to put in the rest of the path for the API where the list data lives, which is double quotes / _ API /web / lists / and then on the other end of the quotes, we're going to do comma null because we don't want headers, and then another comma. And there's different implementations for the OData sources. I'm just going to type this in. So it's implementation 2.0. Implementation equals 2.0. I'm going to go down a line on this too. And we're going to go down another line and say in source. All right, and click on done. And we're going to rename this. So I'm going to call it function query all lists. All right, so we have our function. What you can do with this, there's two different ways you can use it. So you can either use it on a single site. So to use it on a single site, what you do is you just paste in your site URL here and then click on Invoke and it'll run it on just that one site. But what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our query, which has all of our sites on it, and we're going to select the path column here. And then we're going to go to add column and then click on invoke custom function. And this is going to invoke that function we created, which gets data from the lists part of the OData feed on all of our sites. And I just want to remind everyone while we're in here that this list of sites depends on your permissions in your environment. So it's going to give you all of the sites that you have permission to because the OData feeds are security trimmed. So don't expect this to return everything if you don't have access to all sites. I'm going to call this list data, and then we're going to select our function here. I've got two because I did one just to test this out earlier. So this is the one we just created. And then for the input URL, we're going to use our path column. What I like to do with these SharePoint queries, generally speaking, is to put them in data flows in Power BI because that will let you, if you're referencing the same data multiple times, you won't have to pull it from SharePoint every time because SharePoint queries are very slow. So here's what I like to get out of here. So I'm going to deselect everything and then I'm going to go for the created date, the description. The draft version visibility is kind of interesting. It might be useful to you to see if that's turned on or not. It's a true false field. Whether or not minor versions are enabled could be interesting, but I don't really care in this case. Content moderation, whether or not the versioning is enabled, but there's actually another field that tells you how many versions, and I feel like that's a little bit more useful. Okay, I'm going to take the ID, and this hidden field is important because we want to filter out the hidden lists because they're not something that people are actively interacting with. Force checkout, you might want to see who's got that turned on in libraries, so we'll leave that. Sensitivity labels, maybe if you're using that. Item count, so this is the one that's really important. So I like to use item count to keep an eye on the lists that are approaching the 5,000 list view threshold so that we can set up in advance the filtered views for that. Last item modified date, that'll tell you if the list is active or not. That's useful. List experience, so this would be if you want to see which lists are using modern versus classic. Major version limit, so that's the number of major versions it's set to as the maximum. So no crawl, this is going to be whether or not the list is indexable. So by default, it will be crawled, but you can disable search crawling if you want to. And the title, obviously we need that. Author, maybe. Fields is interesting, but if you take fields right now and expand it, you're going to end up with row duplication. So you would want that in a separate query. And we don't want items because we don't want to go quite that far down. That'll make the query super slow. Okay, and I do want the default view also because that's got the path of the list in it. And I'm going to uncheck this use column names as prefix box. Click OK. And this is going to take a while. Depending on the size of your environment, it may not take so long. It just depends on how much content you have in there. So the first thing I'm going to do is filter on the hidden true false field here. So we don't want hidden lists because it just adds a bunch of garbage to our query. So I'm going to remove the hidden equals true lists. And you can rename these steps too to make them more obvious. So we could say filter hidden lists. Oh, we missed one. So I'm going to go back into the gear menu here and get the base template. So the base template is going to tell us which list or library type it is. So for instance, whether it's a custom list or a document library or what have you. And I have Jordan, who is the person who came up with this idea and sent me some information on it. He has a list of all of the library template numbers. So you'll notice this is a numeric column and which list or library type that's associated with. So I'm going to put that into an Excel file and put it in GitHub. So you can join that in with the rest of the data. I've got it somewhere here. What you do, let me show you how to join this up. I'm going to put a link to this in the video description. Basically, you just copy paste this in so that you know which list or library type these things are. So I'm going to, under the home tab, just click on enter data. I'm just going to paste it in like that. I'm going to call this list template reference. And I'm going to disable load on this so that it's not in our model. And then we're going to join this to our list data. So this base template column, I'm going to change this to type whole number, and we may as well actually set the rest of our field types while we're in here. But I'm just going to merge this in first. So the base template, I'm going to click on merge queries, and then we're going to merge in our list template reference. So click on the base template column and the list template ID in the table, because those are the same thing. And then we're going to merge it and then expand to get the template name. All right, so I'm going to expand this out and just get the name. I don't really need the rest of it. And this is optional. If you don't need a text label on these things, you can leave it out. So I'm going to set the rest of our field types now because we want them to be correct. So this created and last modified date, I'm just going to make a date instead of date time, actually. And I'm going to go and select our change type step so that I keep it all together. I'm going to make this date. All right, and then for the default view, it has a field in here somewhere called server relative URL, and that's going to be where we get the path for these lists. So I'm going to deselect all and then select server relative URL here. And I'm going to insert that step and go back to our change type step so that we keep it all together. When you select this step before you go and add things to it, then it keeps it all in one step instead of having like 10 different change type steps. I'm going to change the server relative URL to text. So this server relative URL already has the site path in it, but it doesn't have the root URL. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a column. So what we're doing here is trying to get a valid path for this thing so that when we click on it in reporting, it actually goes to the list. Oops. So let's make a title. I'm going to call it list URL. And for the formula, I'm going to put in the, we have a parameter in here already for the tenant root URL. So I'm going to use that. So you may have called yours something different. Mine is called tenant root URL. If you called yours something else, use whatever you called it. So just put in the parameter there and then an and the server relative URL and click OK. And I like to rename these custom field steps because it just makes more sense that way. All right, so there's our path, and we need to change this to text, and we could delete the server relative URL at this point because we're not, we don't need it now. And then remove this. Something else you could do while you're in here is create another custom column that subtracts the... All right, so I'm going to close and apply this so we can see what it looks like, and then we're going to set a couple of visuals up that will be somewhat useful for us. All right, so before we get started, let's make our relationship. Oh, looks like it auto-created a relationship based on index. I don't really like that. I'm going to change it to the path just to be explicit about it, because depending on what's going on in our queries, the index number may be slightly different. All right, so I'm going to add a new tab to our report. I'm going to call this lists. And I'm going to put in a table. All right, so let's go into our lists query here and just set a few things up. So the created date and the last modified date, I want to set the date format on those to short date. And the item count, I'm going to put a comma in that so that we get the 1,000 separator. So you could rename these fields at this point. The list title, I'm going to rename that one. We're going to put that in our table. And we're going to format that with the path. So I'm going to go to the little caret here, conditional formatting, web URL, and then go in here and select our path. List URL, that's what it is. And then let's check one of these and make sure it works. It does. There's actually no data in this list, so that was kind of a bad example. Put in our item count. And we can sort on this. So I feel like having a good idea of how many, we can sort on this so that our biggest lists are at the top. How about the last modified? The list template, so what type of list it is, and we can put this in a filter too. So if I open up the filter pane and put in the list template as one of the filters on the page level, that way we can say show only document libraries if we want to, or only custom lists. And maybe the version limit in here. Rename some of these. And real quickly, I'm just going to format it like our other one. And it looks like we still have a few of the backend lists, like the microfeed and the app packages list. So you could filter those out in the query if you wanted to, if you don't want to see them in here. The documents will get a little bit confusing because all of the primary document libraries are called documents. So I would put the site in here. So in the table, rename the site title from the other day. And drop in the site title so that people can see what site it's a part of. And you could put that as a filter here too. Maybe use that as a filter on all pages in this report. And add a quick text box with the title. I'm going to turn totals off. Is already off. Now it's really off. Okay. And then maybe add a couple of cards. So we could use the multi-row card here, or you could use the fancy new card visual. So I'm just going to do like a count of lists. So I'm going to do count of lists equals count rows in all lists. And then we can drop that in our card visual. And maybe we even want this by type. So we could do like a count of lists by list template. So obviously we're going to have the most document libraries and wiki page libraries because those come with all sites. However, when you start getting sites that end up being used frequently, you often end up with dozens of or more of lists and libraries in a site. So I'm just going to expand the y-axis here. that, and then maybe take off blanks. So the blank was the one that didn't have the assignment to it. And we could do the same thing, but do it by site title. So count of lists by site title. And you can use these to cross filter too, which is kind of one of my favorite features of Power BI. So if I just want to see the custom lists, I can just cross filter like that and see where they're at, or vice versa. I feel like this one kind of needs a cross filter that actually filters. So you can go to the format, edit interactions, and then click on this filter icon. Have this one selected, click on the filter icon, and it'll completely filter it. That way we can see what's going on a little bit better. All right, so the other thing to take a look at here as far as usefulness for SharePoint administration is sorting by the last modified date. So if you reverse sort on the last modified date, you get the stuff that hasn't been touched in a long time that might be able to be cleaned up. So if you are playing around in this data and you find something really cool that you want to share, please let me know in the comments. Or if you are looking for something in particular and can't find it, let me know that in the comments too. And I hope this was useful to you. We're going to be looking at the recycle bin next, hopefully, so keep an eye out for that, and I hope you have a great day.